Thank you, Mr. Dakia, for introducing the Indian trade portal to the audience here. I'm sure most of us are already aware of this trade portal and are making use of it. And for those of you who are not aware, I'm sure you will browse it and get to know about it. May I now invite Mr. Mithaleshwar Thakur, Joint Director General of Foreign Trade, to deliver his concluding remarks. Mr. Thakur.
Allah sir, Venkatapati sir, dignitaries, other distinguished guests, friends, ladies and gentlemen. We have had a very long, detailed and elaborate presentation on FTA and its implication for countries like ours. And I'm sure most of you must have realized how important it was for you to have an outreach program of FTA. Well, why suddenly this outreach program? An impact analysis was conducted by the Department of Commerce with regard to these FTAs and PTAs based on the concerns and apprehensions expressed by many stakeholders. And it was found, to our disbelief, that many of the stakeholders had acute shortage of awareness. And so DOC, under the guidance of stalwarts like Bhalla sir, we have been conducting FTA outreach program all over the country, continuously. Now some of you may ask yourself, why do we need FTAs and PTAs when we were permanent members of WTO? Because WTO had the principle of non-discrimination and it was something that consensus driven. But I would say that the FTAs and PTAs have been possibly the manifestation of the frustration and impatience of many trading countries over the inordinate delays and even deadlock in WTO negotiations. Many countries found that by its very nature, the consensus-driven approach of WTO, we were not able to conclude, we were not able to reach a decision. So they thought of experimenting with deeper liberalization with their neighboring partners, and in the process now, I'm talking about January, I'm not as updated as Mr. Lakhia is. In January 2015, we had around 398 FTAs and PTAs signed all over the world. And the good thing is that these FTAs and PTAs have wider coverage and scope in terms of trade negotiations because they do not only deal with so-called tariff and non-tariff barriers of goods and services, but they also deal with things like investment, intellectual property, and rule harmonization and classification. Now, during the impact analysis that was conducted by the ministry, there were certain things which came to notice which sound very surprising. Like it was found that the benefit of preferential trade was not being taken advantage of. Very startling. But then in 2013-14 it was found that the preferential import under Indo-Malaysia SICA was only 3.4% of the total imports. Then there was a lot of apprehension that was expressed that maybe these kind of agreements are being done in haste and may release to diversion of trade, may end up in trade diversions and things like that. But the study found that none of the major markets of India were being displaced by the trading partners, which concluded that there was no diversion of trade worth its name. We also found that we were not ending up as export of raw materials. In fact, there was growth in our share of exports of capital goods and intermediate goods, which is a kind of good signal for us to get integrated into global value chain. Yes, there were certain agreements like the agreement that we had with Japan and with ASEAN. Probably we were not able to harness the potential of this agreement as much as we would have liked it to be. But then yes, the government can always have review of these agreements. There were some other concerns. One thing that government was very keen on doing is that lot of preferential export data is not being captured at all, because in our shipping documentation there is no provision for entering preferential export data. So we are not really in a position to evaluate how much we are gaining or losing. So that step is being done. Then there is a talk of tweaking with the rules of origin, because on account of the concerns of the domestic industry, the rules of origin that we negotiate in most of the FTAs and PTAs have been fairly conservative. And these conservative rules of origin basically impede, or restrict our integration in the global value chain. Because today there has been a paradigm shift in the way we conduct our trade. It is not firm versus firm, it is global chain versus, it is supply chain versus supply chain. And every country, what's its name, is very keen on integrating itself with the global value chain. It's an stage, we are in a position where a particular product is not only manufactured in one location, it is manufactured in various locations. So maybe a product from stage A to B is being manufactured in a country X, from B to C in country Y, from C to D in country G, and then being integrated and exported. I think Levi Strauss jeans, the manufacturer of Levi Strauss jeans, is one of the most glaring example, where yarn is imported from Taiwan, then it is dyed in Korea, then it is cut in Bangladesh, and then the zipper is fitted in Japan. So we are in a stage of internationalization manufacturing process, and we need to be alive to this reality. Now there are another things that our trade industry should be very keen to learn. One is that the impending threat of the mega agreements that I think Mr. Kasturi also touched upon a bit. That the three mega agreements, TPP, TTIP and RCEP, these member countries, they account for almost say 80% of the world GDP and 75% of the world trade. You can imagine the dimension. And we are only the participants in RCEP. So what will happen is that we, not being a part of TPP, most of the existing preferences that we enjoy vis-a-vis US and EU will get eroded in no time, and there will be a higher burden of compliance with standards. Now we cannot sit back and we need to gear ourselves up. We need to invest in R&D. We need to invest in improving our standards. The kind of certification accreditation system that we have here is to be very fair, is shoddy. I don't think certification agencies do the kind of due diligence that it should have done. And therefore, the answer lies in our product innovation, in process innovation, in R&D. Our R&D expenditure is a meager 2.8% of the world R&D expenditure, which is 1/5 of China, 1/5 of investment by China, and 1/10 of US. Our contribution to global research output is only 3.5%. We claim to be one of the largest pool of scientific and technological manpower, but the number of scientists that we have per million of population is about 164, compared to China's 860 plus and US around 4605 per million. So we stand practically nowhere. The real innovation and R&D that is taking place in India is happening in R&D centers of the multinationals. Many of the Indian companies, they prefer, dubbing their marketing expenses as R&D expenses to just enjoy tax breaks. We need to change that culture. And R&D and innovation is not only important from exporting point of view, it is very important from Make in India point of view as well. Because Make in India actually is not only about, we should not see it from the prism of manufacturing alone. That is, it's basically should be seen from its potential of employment generation. Now, the point is that what model do we adopt? In Make in India, like one model is mass manufacturing. But the current generation, that so-called demographic dividend that we talk about, and the kind of population that we have, it is a technology-savvy generation that we have. And with the growth and rise in land and labor prices, this generation would not like to, be doing soft floor, low technology jobs. They would love to engage themselves in high technology jobs. So probably the answer of Make in India could be in sunrise industries, which will be technology intensive industry. And for this model to succeed, the R&D has to go up. Our patent filing is only, I'll quote, I'll quickly try to finish it. In 2013, India's number of patents filed was only 10,000 odd, whereas in China it was 7 lakh plus. So we need to catch up in R&D investment. And the only which can probably, if we choose to embrace technology, if we choose to fall in love with R&D and innovation, and if we are ready to replicate the best business practices of the world, probably I think nothing can prevent India from being exporting powerhouse.